Hello again. Good to have you back. I've got stories from another forest planet for you today. Felucia, if you've heard of it. Felucia is an alien world if there ever was one. On Kashyyyk at least, the trees and animals are all at least somewhat similar to those from less obscure planets. But there's nowhere in the galaxy quite like Felucia. The life forms there throw all the usual patterns out the window, leaving you with a jungle of giant fungi full of animals that you can see straight through. Felucia is not a destination for the faint of heart. And not only because it's weird, there's plenty of danger there too. Some of it conventional and some of it as bizarre as the planet itself.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Like with Kashyyyk's Shadowlands, it feels weird just setting foot on Felucia. This time, it's not some inherent darkness or whatever though. Felucia's gravity is 75% of the galactic standard, which is strong enough to keep you from doing any crazy jumps, but just weak enough that you feel like something's off. This is probably a big part of why the planet's wildlife is so unusual. Weaker gravity means life forms can grow larger more easily. The other part probably has something to do with Felucia's sun, Felix. Felix puts out a lot of ultraviolet light, which among other things can mess with DNA, causing mutations. That might be part of why Felucian wildlife is so peculiar, but it's also another danger for visitors, as excessive UV causes cancer in humans. Felucia's skies are typically at least partially overcast though, which makes that a bit less of a problem. Just play it safe and pack some extra sunscreen. Felucia is hot and humid all over, and there's pretty much only two environments across the whole planet: shallow oceans and fungal jungles. The oceans are choked with algae and spores, and presumably they've got their own assortment of native life forms, but it's the jungles that Felucia is known for. You see, most jungles across the galaxy are made of trees, but Felucia's aren't. The planet is covered with giant, tree-sized flora of various kinds, but none of them are actually trees and many aren't even plants. That's the other unusual thing about Felucia. It's dominated by fungi. There are proper plants on Felucia, but they're much less prominent for the most part, opposite to how things work on most planets. The third thing that makes Felucia's wildlife unusual is how it's all translucent. From the big fungi to Felucia's animals, most of the creatures on the planet are see-through. It's an adaptation to protect them from the planet's harsh UV rays, supposedly. When the skies are clear, sunlight makes Felucia's jungles light up in a dazzling array of colors. It's a really pretty sight, if one best seen from the safe side of a transparasteel viewport. Most kinds of plant and fungus on Felucia don't have proper names. Scientists haven't even categorized half of what grows on that planet, and that's only taking into account the species we know of. The largest flora in the jungles are enormous fungi. Giant purple mushrooms, tall spine-looking growths, picture plant-like fungi, and enormous knotted amalgams predominate, while the undergrowth is dominated by spike and spore plants, as well as the healing herb, Nissalin. But this is hardly an exhaustive list, and there are also many creatures on Felucia that blur the line between plant, fungus, and animal. The Yerdua poison spitter is a good example, a semi-sentient, rooted creature that eats meat and spits poison at trespassers. Felucia's animals are every bit as weird as the plants and fungi. Flying mantas, Felucian rippers, and odd bird-like creatures rule the skies. Slime snipes live in the trees, and Felucian snails, slugs, and cat bunnies dominate the ground. Felucia's got plenty of bugs, such as the Felucian firefly and the parasitic cerulean droch. The most notable bug on Felucia is the giant Gela grub, the largest species of bug in the galaxy. The adult form of the Gellergrub was an enormous beetle, but its larval stage was probably the least terrifying of all the living things on Felucia, despite being giant see-through grubs covered in slime. Gellergrub larvae are docile and make good beasts of burden, and they're also quite cute. Some of these species are harmless, others will attack you if they're hungry or you seem like an easy meal, but will otherwise leave you alone. But some of Felucia's wildlife are outright hostile. The cerulean droke and Yodua poison spitter I mentioned earlier are good examples of this. However, the worst dangers on Felucia aren't the large predators, they're microscopic. All the fungi on Felucia clog up the air with spores, some of which are dangerous. The jungles are also teeming with all manner of exotic germs you likely have no immunity to, and Felucian flesh-eating diseases are no joke. You might also have heard of some more well-known predators that stalk the jungles of Felucia, such as the jungle rancor and the Acklay. Well, these creatures, as well as the docile Timus, are actually non-native, although they've firmly established themselves on Felucia by this point. They're not the only non-native creatures on the planet either. Most of the planet's population is composed of settlers. There are two main settler populations on Felucia. The less noteworthy one is the Felucians, who immigrated to Felucia from some other world and have made it their adopted homeworld. They're mostly peaceful farmers and they're friendly to outsiders. For the most part, they live in simple villages in the jungles, and they've been on Felucia for millennia. The Felucians are supposedly distant relatives of the Gossams, the other settler population on the planet, who were the first outsiders to discover Felucia back in the pre-Republic era. Thousands of years before the Republic, Gossam Karivas using primitive tumble drives found and colonized Felucia. They faced stiff resistance from the planet's wildlife, but they eventually succeeded in establishing settlements on the planet, and the Gossams have controlled Felucia ever since. There's about 8.5 million settlers on Felucia, most of them in the Gossam cities. Kuei Tiao is the capital. The other major ones are Niango, Jiaozi, and Hargao. All of these are controlled by the Commerce Guild, which pretty much owns the Gossam species and has its headquarters on Felucia. The guild nominally owns Felucia, and it's got a bunch of fortresses all over the planet, plus armies of battle droids out in the jungles. But they're only really trespassers, and they only control a few small parts of the planet. There are a fair few villages deep in the jungle that are home to renegades and enemies of the guild, havens for criminals and escaped workers alike. And if you go even deeper, there are far stranger and more dangerous settlements for you to find. The Felucians, despite their name, aren't indigenous to Felucia, but the planet does have one indigenous sentient species, the Jungle Felucians. The Jungle Felucians are low-tech and very insular, living in tribal, shamanistic communities very deep in the jungle. These guys are truly bizarre, as you'd expect from Felucia. They're bipedal amphibians with suction cup-like extremities. Their arms split at the elbows, giving them 4 forearms and an extra set of hands. And their faces, well, you really have to see them to get a good picture. But their most extraordinary attribute is something all Felucian creatures share: an intrinsic interconnection. See, I don't know how much you know about fungi, but even on ordinary planets, they're pretty weird. They've got an odd symbiotic relationship with plants that almost works like a sort of hive mind in some cases. But on Felucia, this is taken to the next level. All living things on the planet are interconnected. The whole place is like one giant living thing. It's not just the plants and fungi either, but the animals as well, and the jungle Felucians are no exception. I heard a Jedi say once that the jungle Felucians were innately force sensitive, and while I don't really go in for the whole force thing, the Felucians certainly have some kind of power to them. They're not the only ones either. One of the more elusive predators on Felucia is the Karten. They're bipedal but non-sentient, and they're very solitary, keeping to strictly defined patches of territory. They also supposedly hunt using the Force. I don't quite know how it works, but the Carton are able to mind trick other creatures to appear friendly, allowing the Carton to easily capture and kill them. There are also places on Felucia that seem shrouded in darkness, like the Shadowlands on Kashyyyk. The Rancor Graveyard is one such place, a spot deep in the jungles littered with the bones of jungle Rancors. Another is the Ancient Abyss, which the jungle Felucians apparently consider a sort of holy site. To the careless, it might just look like a pit with vines growing out of it, but the Ancient Abyss is actually the mouth of a huge sarlacc, the largest I've ever heard of. The jungle Felucians, if you can believe it, have a city built above its gullet, and they supposedly use the sarlacc as a sacrifice pit. Felucia is a crazy world. A pretty one, but a crazy one nonetheless. Honestly, you might want to stay away from it if at all possible. Having to deal with the Commerce Guild is bad enough, but there are 1,000 other ways to die on Felucia, and none of them are particularly pleasant. I think that's enough storytelling for one day. Maybe we can talk about some place more pleasant next time, like Naboo or Alderaan. I'll see you then.